Chav Zayin Amid Beis, in the middle of the page, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ein Biur Chulu. Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that the only way to destroy chametz was to burn it. He argued with the sages. The sages said that you could crumble it up and throw it into the wind or put it into the sea. He says no, it needs to be burnt. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ein Biur Chulu. Okay, Tanya, it's taught in the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Ein Biur Chametz Ela Sreifa. What's the source for Rabbi Yehuda? So we have a Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda says that the Mishnah also, but the Brisa is going to give us some detail. Rabbi Yehuda says that the chametz, in order to destroy chametz, it needs to be burnt. That's the destruction of chametz. And it's also logical. What about nicer? Nicer is leftover carbon over the time that was allotted for it, either 1 day or 2 days. And it's left over till the morning. So it's left over past the allotted time, whatever that is. So the rule is Tan Shreifa. It doesn't say that you're not allowed to own it, but nevertheless, it needs to be burnt. So chametz sheyeshna bal yira bal yimati, like kol shkein shetan shreifa. Chametz is stricter than that. Chametz says you can't even own it. And so for sure, if Nicer has a rule that it needs to be burnt, so chametz for sure needs to be burnt. Amrulai. You're making a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is if nicer is not so strict, but it still needs to be burnt. So chametz, which is more strict, for sure needs to be burnt. It comes out that you're going to end up with something even less. Why? It says, let's say you don't have wood to burn it. So it's going to come out that you're just going to sit over there and you're not going to burn it. So, because you can't destroy it any other way. So what's going to come out is a leniency. If the only way that you're able to destroy it is through burning, so what's going to come out is that nicer, which is not so strict, you have to burn. So chametz, which is more strict, for sure you should have to burn. What's going to come out is chametz, which is so strict, you're going to end up doing nothing. Because if you don't have the wood, you're not going to burn it. So you can't come out with a leniency from a kal v'chomer. So Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, we won't use a kal v'chomer, we'll do the same thing, but we won't use the kal v'chomer. No, the kal v'chomer needs to come out with the stringency. What we'll do is we'll use a gzeir shava. Chazer Rabbi Yehuda v'dani din acher. Nicer aser b'achila. Rabbi Yehuda learns it differently. He learns from gzeir shava. That means we find similar word by nicer, and nicer is aser b'achila. Chametz is aser b'achila. Nicer you're not allowed to eat. Chametz you're not allowed to eat. Ma nicer b'sreifa, chametz b'sreifa. We should apply the same rule. Nicer, the leftover carbon needs to be burnt. So the chametz needs to be burnt. A question from Nevela. It proves that this limud is not correct. In other words, officially Rashi called this a gzeir shava. I think what it means to say is a mamatzina, because usually it would say by gzeir shava would tell me it says a word over here, it says a word over there that's the same. I think the Gemara is using a mamatzina, which is really a binyan out. We find over here this halacha, so therefore that should apply everywhere else that's similar. It's a comparison. So we say, let's compare nicer to chametz, or chametz to nicer. Nicer is aser b'achila. You're not allowed to eat the nicer, and you're required to burn it. So too, other places also. Chametz, you're not allowed to eat, and therefore you should have to burn it, just like by nicer. The Gemara asks a question on that. 1 second. Am I allowed to eat nevela? No, you can't eat nevela. Do I have to burn it? No. So you just you messed up the whole comparison. You see clearly that there are things you're not allowed to eat, and you don't have to burn. So Rabbi Yehuda responds to them, and he's trying to get the rule that you need to burn chametz, destroy chametz through burning. He's trying to get this from another source. So he says, Amalan hefresh. There's a difference. Nicer aser b'achila b'hana. Ooh, you missed one point. Nicer You're not allowed to eat, and you're also not allowed to benefit, which is exactly like chametz. Chametz aser b'achila bana. Ma nicer time streifa, chametz time streifa. So you see, it's not the achila part that tells me this. It's the achila and hana, and that is only applicable to nicer and to chametz. And both of them have streifa. We're gonna now learn that they both have streifa because nicer has streifa, chametz also has streifa. But don't ask me questions from nevela. Nevela is not aser bana. It doesn't come into this equation. Amrulai, so 1 second. I have something that's aser bana and it doesn't require burning. You're trying to use a comparison from nicer, which is aser b'achila and bana, forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit from. Yeah, and it requires streifa, so therefore chametz should also require streifa. But I have a question. I have something else that's aser b'achila bana, a shara neskal, an ox that killed a man. It's stoned. You're not allowed to benefit from it. You're not allowed to eat it, and it doesn't require burning. So chametz also. How do you know that chametz requires burning? It's there's a question on that whole comparison. Amalam Hefresh says there's a difference. Nicer aser b'achila bana v'anish kares. The chametz aser b'achila bana v'anish kares. Ma nicer b'streifa chametz b'streifa. You're throwing in this third item to mess up the comparison. The third item is not similar. The third item, the shara niskal, doesn't have kares. Doesn't have that punishment, excision. The only thing that would have a kares would be nicer and chametz. Both of them aser b'achila bana and kares. Chametz also is aser b'achila bana and kares, and so therefore that's both of them require streifa. Just like nicer requires streifa, also chametz requires streifa. Are you going to tell me the shara niskal that doesn't have kares? Versus 1 second. This is a very interesting retort. 1 second. What about in the shara niskal itself? I'm not allowed to eat it. I'm not allowed to have enjoyment from it. I can't get benefit from it. Now, you asked me that there's no kares by it. There is one part of it which is kares, and that has nothing to do with the shara niskal. But there's kares because chelev, the prohibition of eating chelev is kares. So if it would have been chelev itself, not from a shara niskal, then it would have been aser b'achila and kares, but it wouldn't have been aser b'ana. I can have benefit from chelev, I just can't eat it. And if I do eat it, it would be kares. But here I have an iser hana on the chelev because it's a shara niskal. And so therefore this chelev of a shara niskal is perfectly similar to chametz. And the rule is that the shara niskal doesn't require, the chelev of the shara niskal doesn't require burning. That's a good question. You're trying to say that anything that's aser b'achila, bana, and kares requires burning. So therefore chametz requires burning. This doesn't. The chelev of the shara niskal has all the factors, has all the variables. They're all in that, and it doesn't require burning. Chaser Rabbi Yehuda, we're on top of Chapes. Chaser Rabbi Yehuda, we've done a dinachet. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda has a different limud. Nicer yeshnem balte siru, chametz balte siru. Doesn't have to do. We're not doing a comparison from achila and hana and kares. We're doing a comparison from a prohibition of letting it hang around. Nicer is not allowed to hang around. Don't leave it over. And chametz also has a prohibition, don't let it hang around. You shouldn't find it. It shouldn't be in your possession. So ma nicer b'sreifa, chametz b'sreifa. See, there's very few things that you could compare to this. Can't let it hang around. It's not like nevela or other things, shara niskal. Yeah. Now we got to figure out how we're going to make it work. Yeah. Avram Nassan's pointing out that Rabbi Yehuda knew that the din was streifa. He's working backwards. Just where's the source for it? That's probably that seems clear what's going on over there. Okay, so we have a comparison from nicer to chametz. Amr Lai, they said, Asham Tali b'chata saifa bala safek l'dvarachi yechichu. Shem b'balte siru. Sha'anu aimer b'streifa v'ata aimer b'kvura. Okay, this is a very difficult attack on Rabbi Yehuda. Not logically. Logically, it fits, but it's difficult for Rabbi Yehuda because what they're doing is there's two sacrifices. An asham talai. That's if someone isn't sure if he committed the sin. He ate a fat that was on the table, and he doesn't know if it was chelav or shuman. So it could have been the sin. So he brings an asham talai, protects him until he finds out. He brings that sacrifice. And a chata sa'if abala safed. This is a chata sa'if, a woman that had a miscarriage. She doesn't know if it was actually a fetus or not. So she has to bring usually if she would give birth, she would have to bring a sacrifice before she eats from other sacrifices. So here she has a suffix. So she brings it on a condition, on a tanai. Says, if it was a child, if it was long enough or old enough or whatever, so then it should be a sacrifice. And if not, then it was just a nadava. Okay. Now, you're not allowed to eat this sacrifice because you're not allowed to eat this chatasai. Why? Because the way it's sacrificed is you use the fingernail. So if it was a good sacrifice, then it's a good shchita. It's called malika. You use the fingernail to break the neck, to cut through the neck. And if it's not a good sacrifice, then it's regular nevela, because you cut it through the back of the neck. Okay, so what do you do with it? So it's a machlekes the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan say you burn it, and Rabbi Yehuda says you bury it. Here we have an issue. We have something that's usher, that's considered nicer, possibly, and you're not allowed to burn it. And what do you do with it? Instead of, you're not allowed to eat it, what do you do with it? You bury it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda's whole limud is learning from nicer. We have a case where if you would follow our opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, you would be right. But it turns out that according to your own opinion, you're wrong. Because according to your opinion, you hold that the chatas ha'if is buried and not burnt. So your own opinion messes up your pshat. Shasak Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's quiet. Amar Rabbi Yosef says, I didn't look up the commentaries on this Agadita, but we have three phrases here that the Gemara tells us. Hainu Damri Inchi, Rabbi Yosef says this is what the people say. Kappa dechata nagra, a spoon that was carved out by a carpenter, the gabei nisref chardala. In it, he puts mustard, which burns his own palate. In other words, it's what they call this, a taste of his own medicine. This is he's getting burnt from his own item. It was his own opinion is what's messing up his. Amar Rabaya Amar, Sadhana B'Sedine Yasif, Madvil Yodei Mishnah. I'm sorry? I didn't hear that. Okay, Sadhana B'Sedine Yasif. This is someone that makes some sort of chains that he gets locked in his own chains. I guess a blacksmith gets locked in his own, he gets tangled from the work of his hands. Rava Amar Gira B'Gire Miktel, Midvil Yadei Mishtalim. This is someone that makes arrows. He gets shot with his own arrow. He gets tangled in his own hands. Okay, that's what we're saying, that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion regarding a chatas ha'if that gets buried messes up his opinion about chametz being burnt.
By the way, Stefanski does a nice thing on this. He says it's the same message, but it's by degree. Like, saras. Like at first it's like just a burn, then it's jail, then it's death. It's like
very good. Very good. Very good. Let me see. That's. I'm sorry. We didn't settle Rabbi Yehuda, and then we left off with Shasak Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was quiet. Right. What's the source? Right. Okay. The Chachamim say that you can crumble it up and you throw it into the wind, or you put it into the sea. Ibailo, Gemara's a question. How exactly do the Chachamim say this? What do they hold? Mefarer v'zer l'ruach u'mefarer mataliyan. You see, it says that you crumble it up, comma, and you throw it into the wind, or throw it into the sea. Now, what that would mean was that you crumble it up, and then you have two options: you throw it into the wind, or throw it into the sea, or you take away the comma, and it goes like this: you crumble it up and throw it into the wind, or you throw it into the sea without crumbling. Just you can throw it into the sea whole. Question is, are there two options after you crumble it up, or is it crumbling up? Well, it's only going on the it's a grammar question. Yeah, the crumbling up is only going on the throwing into the wind. So that's the question here. V'tanan nami was also taught kabi avodah zarah ki agavna. Similarly, by avodah zarah, it says the same thing. Rabbi Yisrael sheichik. You grind it, v'zer l'ruach, and you throw it into the wind, or you throw it into the sea. The same question we had about avodah zarah. Do you grind the avodah zarah up? You're destroying the avodah zarah. But do you grind it up and throw it into the wind? And you can also grind it up and throw it into the sea, or you don't need to grind it up if you're throwing it into the sea. If you're throwing it into the wind, what's going to happen? It's going to fall down. You need to grind it up. If you throw it into the sea, you don't need to grind it up. It's going to get lost. It's in the sea. You don't need to grind it up to destroy that as well. It's going to be lost from people if you throw it into the sea. Okay. Amar Rabba says we're going to have it here. Machlekes Rabba and Rabbi Yossi. Wow, Moshe already at a location. So we're discussing over here the Chacham's opinion of destroying chametz, that it doesn't need to be burnt. You can grind it up or crumble it up and throw it into the wind. The question is, what about when you throw it into the sea? Do you need to crumble it up as well, or can you just throw it? So we said that same machlekes applies to avodah zarah. That same question applies to avodah zarah. Now, Rabba says he's going to make a decision that this one is going to be like this one's going to be like that. Rabbi Yosef is going to also make a decision, exactly the opposite, that this is going to be like this and that's going to be like exactly the opposite of Rabba. So it goes like this. Amar Rabba mistabra avodah zarah d'liyama melach ka'azla le'bay shchika. Did we say mata liyama melach? Avodah zarah, you're throwing it into the Yama Melach. You're throwing it into a place where no boats go. So Rabbah says, if no one goes there anyway, so why should you have to crumble it up? It's just going to get you're throwing it in a place where no one's ever going to reach, and no one travels over there. So it doesn't take you anywhere. So you don't have to crumble it up. You just throw it in there. Chametz till shanars kazel ba'ipir, but chametz, you're going to throw it anywhere, any river. So there could be that you throw it into the river, a boat's going to come by and see the chametz, and it's going to take it. So you have to crumble it up first. It's not really destroyed until you crumble it up. That's Rabba's opinion. Amali Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says to Rabba, it's exactly the opposite. It's really the opposite. Avodah zarah is this little idol made out of wood, stone, whatever. When you throw it into the ocean, it doesn't get destroyed. It's still going to be there. A boat's going to come along and see it. Say, hey, look, here's an idol. They're going to take it in over on board, take it on deck. But the bread, that's going to get, you throw it into the ocean, that's going to be get soggy. No one's going to take it on board. So really, The bread you could throw into the sea without crumbling. And Avodah Zarah, you need to crumble, exactly the opposite of Rabbah. Tanika would say the Rabbah, Tanika would say the Rabbi Yosef. We have brises that support both of them, which would mean it's, you could say the other way. You have a brisa that's a question on both of them. But we start off, it's a support for each of them. Tanika would say the Rabbah, hey, malach b'midbar. Brisa that supports Rabbah. Someone is walking in the desert and he has chametz. Mefar b'zay l'rach. He could crumble it up and throw it into the wind. Hey, malach b'svina. If he's traveling on a boat, mifarer o matlayam. You crumble it up and you throw it into the sea. Exactly what Rabbah held. That when it comes to chametz, you have to crumble it up. A boat may come along and take it on deck, the chametz. So mefarer is the expression that's used to crumble, is an expression that's used for chametz. Tani Kabasei the Rabbi Yosef, you have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yosef, Hayamalach b'midbar. He's walking in the desert, Sheichik b'zayr l'ruach. He grinds it up. That's an expression that's used for Avodah Zarah. And he throws it into the wind. Hayamalach b'svina, if he's on a boat, Sheichik amat l'yam. He grinds it up and he throws it into the sea. That means that by Avodah Zarah you need to grind it up, which was Rabbi Yosef's opinion. Shechika kasha l'Rabba, apir kasha l'Rabbi Yosef. The Gemara now says, 1 second. Now it comes a question on each one. The brisa of shchika that says that you grind it, that's a kasha on Rabbah. Rabbah said you can just throw it. And mefarer is a kasha on Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says that by chametz, you could just throw it. And the brisa says you have to crumble it up. Shchika l'Rabbah like kasha. The Gemara says it's not really a question. Rabbah agreed that if you're throwing it into other seas, you need to grind it up. It was only Rabbah's opinion was that in the Yam HaMelach you don't need to grind it. Other seas you do need to grind it up. It's not a kasha on Rabbah. It says the Yam HaMelach, no boats go, so there's no traveling over there. You don't take the Yam HaMelach to go to a destination. It wasn't a river that you can or a sea. However, okay, so by the Yam HaMelach, you could throw it over. You could throw it into the Yam HaMelach. You don't need to grind it. But any other sea, you do need to. So you can never ask the kasha on Rabbah because you can always say we're talking about the other place. Now for Rabbi Yosef also we can answer easy. There's different types of chametz. There's chametz that's made into bread. That you throw into the water, it's going to get soggy. But then there's kernels of wheat. Kernels of wheat you can throw into the water, and you can still take it out. Let's say a sack of kernels of wheat. So if it was a sack of kernels of wheat that you threw into the water, someone's going to come along and say, look, we found a sack of wheat. They'll take it overboard, let it dry or whatever. And they have a sack of wheat. It didn't go bad from the water. So what do you have to do? You have to open up the bag according to Rabbi Yosef and be mefarer.
Rabbi, question on Yam HaMelech.
Yeah.
Maybe the reason that by Yam HaMelech you don't grind it up is if the purpose is that it should sink into the sea. By Yam HaMelech things would float. If you crumble it up, greater chance it's got air, it'll float. But if you leave it as a solid piece, it surely shall sink.
So you're asking on according to Rabbah, that says that the Yam HaMelech you don't need to crumble it up because it's going to sink over there. But in the question is, it's going to sink in the ocean as well.
They knew about scuba diving even back then.
I'm just saying, in Yam HaMelech B'davka, the only way to get it to sink would be to leave it whole. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, it doesn't have the waves and turbulence of an ocean somewhere.
Right. Right. You see, they had divers back then. I don't know if they had scuba gear, but they had divers. I don't know what they were getting, sponges or pearls or stuff, but they were divers. I know the Chavis Halvavos writes about people that risk their lives to earn a living. It's like it's making fun of them. But one of his examples is divers.
The Japanese pearl divers.
Okay. Today it would be the people that clean the nuclear tanks. They have to dive in to get the waste out. We have a new Mishnah. Chametz shel nachri she'avar lav Pesach muter bana v'shel Yisrael aser bana shneimar le'yira lechasar. Very interesting Mishnah. The Gemara is going to really take this apart. It starts off with chametz of a non-Jew that Pesach passes over. That means it was existing during Pesach. It's muter bana. After Pesach, you're allowed to have benefit from this chametz. If it belonged to a Jew, then it's aser bana after Pesach. And the source is shneimar le'yira lechasar. The Gemara says, Mani Masnisim. Who's the author of our Mishnah? V'lei Rabbi Yehuda, v'lei Rabbi Shimon, v'lei Rabbi Yosei Glili. It doesn't fit with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai, the student of Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't fit with Rabbi Shimon. It's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's a student of Rabbi Akiva. V'lei Rabbi Yosei Glili. Doesn't fit with Rabbi Yosei Glili, who's Talmud Chaver, Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't fit with his opinion either. Now, what the Gemara is going to do over here, it's going to discuss their opinions all the way down the Yamad Beis of Chavches Yamad Beis. It's going to go down the whole page, and at the end, it's going to say Mani Masnisin. Who does it fit like? So we have a long discussion here. We're going to sort of forget our original question as we go through this discussion. Then at the end of it, we'll get back to the question and we'll try to fit it in. See who the Mishnah fits with. Says Maihi. What is this machlekes that you're discussing? It says the Tanya was taught in a brisa. Chametz. Bein lefnei zmanei, bein lachas zmanei, over lav belav. Teich zmanei, over lav belav. According to Rabbi Yehuda. Chametz before Pesach, in the 6 hours before Pesach, or after Pesach, there's a negative prohibition to eat that chametz, or to have benefits from it, probably. Clearly to eat it. Clearly to eat it is a negative prohibition. On Pesach itself, it's more than a negative prohibition. It's a negative prohibition and karas. So before Pesach and after Pesach is a negative prohibition. And on Pesach, it's a negative prohibition and karas, which tells me that why can't that fit with our Mishnah? The Gemara is going to say that he doesn't mention if it belongs to a Jew or not. According to Rabbi Yehuda, chametz that Pesach that was existed during Pesach, after Pesach was aser bana. Doesn't say who owns it. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says chametz lifnei zmanei ulachar zmanei eina overlav b'liklum. Rabbi Shimon holds that lifnei zmanei, that means on erev Pesach, within the 6 hours, or after Pesach, there's no prohibition. It's a problem over here. Taisus points out. We have psukim that says you're not allowed to eat chametz while you're shechting the korban Pesach. The seichel of chametz. So Taisus says that it just means different possibilities. It probably is aser b'achila, but what Reb Shimon is saying is that there's no negative prohibition. So what exactly is it? Some sort of prohibition, but it's not the regular law that we're talking about. But whatever the case is, after Pesach, there's no prohibition. Reb Shimon clearly cannot fit with our Mishnah. According to our Mishnah, it says after Pesach, it's aser bana. According to Reb Shimon, there's no prohibition at all. On Pesach, he agrees that there's a negative prohibition and there's also a punishment of karas, to eat it. At the time that it's prohibited to eat it, you're also not allowed to have benefit. Now, asan l'tanakama, that fits with the Tanakama. That's the Gemara adds in. In other words, in Reb Shimon's wording, we have an extra phrase there. At the time that it's prohibited to eat it, you're not allowed to have benefit. The Gemara right away says that that's not Reb Shimon's statement. That goes back on the Tanakama on Rabbi Yehuda's statement. Rabbi Yehuda said that you're not allowed to eat the chametz 6 hours before Pesach. There's a negative prohibition. That opinion also holds that you can't have benefit from it at that time either. Okay. Rabbi Yosei Glili, his opinion is totally different. He says it's a big wonder. Hey, chametz aser b'ana kol shiva. What are you saying? Chametz on Pesach, it's not aser b'ana. It's just you're not allowed to eat it. He holds that you're allowed to have benefit from chametz, even during Pesach. We've mentioned Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion before. Obviously, that's not the halacha, but we've mentioned that before. Okay, now it goes on. It says, how do you know that there's a negative prohibition to eat chametz, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to eat chametz before Pesach, on from 6 hours and up on Erev Pesach? Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot let it eat chametz while you're shechting the carbon Pesach, and the time of the shechita of the carbon Pesach is from 6 hours and up. Really, from 7 hours and up. We say 6 hours. Okay. Amalei Reb Shimon says, is that possible? I have a pasuk that says 7 days you should eat matzahs, don't eat chametz, or don't eat chametz, 7 days you should eat matzahs. So therefore it tells me that the only time that I'm not allowed to eat chametz is when the time that when I'm obligated to eat matzah. If that's the case, then there is no prohibition of chametz erev Pesach. So then why does it say don't eat chametz at that time? He doesn't explain clearly, but he's saying whatever the case is that there's clearly no prohibition of eating chametz on erev Pesach. It's only at the time when you have the obligation to eat matzah, which is that evening.
Then what does he do with the pasuk?
He uses it as a comparison. He uses it as a juxtaposition. The pasuk that says le'seichel of chametz continues with shivas yamim teichel of matzah, and it's coming to limit that when do I know when I have to eat matzah. That's in the evening. So therefore, the pasuk "don't eat chametz" is coming to tell me that I only don't eat chametz at the time that I eat matzah. Maybe he's also telling me the other way. Does it say that? I think it said that.
So earlier in this discussion, you said lo sochel alav chametz divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah. It's saying divrei Rabbi Yehuda is saying he's using this pocket for the following interpretation. Is that another way of saying that?
He's saying it the opposite. Don't eat chametz on Erev Pesach is the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Le'seichel of chametz. Comes along Reb Shimon. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's a problem over here. But it says, probably the first part of the pasuk, le'seichel of chametz, was not emphasized. It says, Reb Shimon's saying, how could you say this? It says, shivas yam teichel of matzahs. It says 7 days you eat matzahs. What do I do with le'seichel of chametz? That's coming to limit the time when you're not allowed to eat matzah, when you're not allowed to eat chametz. It's coming to tell you when is that begin. It begins in the evening. Yeah, you're asking Taisa's question, by the way. Taisa says, "Im kin ma tamad leimar le'seichel of haloshen dachak." V'nir l'raj b'dahachi perusha v'lik v'nem le'seichel of matzahs. Well, you have to drop the first part of the pasuk, and then it would fit. You don't. If you would just say like this, drop the first part. Then Reb Shimon says, what do you do with the seichel of chametz, the first part of the pasuk? Yeah, does that fit better according to the way Taisus does it? Yeah, you have to adjust the gear cell a little bit. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back and says, My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda that he said that it's prohibited before Pesach, that we knew. It's prohibited on Pesach with karas, and it's prohibited also after Pesach. Chametz shavel of a Pesach. Where does he get that from? The Gemara says, Tlasa kroi ksivi. It says 3 psukim. It says, Lo yeyachal chametz. Chametz should not be eaten. The Gemara later on is going to use that pasuk to tell me that it's usher even after Pesach. You'll see that. Any chametz should not be eaten. That's going to be referring to on Pesach. Leiseichal alav chametz is referring to erev Pesach. Don't eat chametz when the carbon Pesach is being brought. Chad lifnei zmanei, v'chad lacher zmanei, v'chad l'teich zmanei. It's kept telling me 3 times of a prohibition of chametz. Before Pesach, the 6 hours on erev Pesach, on Pesach itself, and then after Pesach. Reb Shimon says chad l'teich zmanei. One of them tells me only on Pesach. What do these do with the other 2 psukim? Kol machmetzes mi boile. He uses the pasuk of kol machmetzes to tell me, look at the Tanya was taught in the Brisa. Ainli elishin chametz me'elav machmas davarachim minayin. I would only know that chametz means that it became chametz because you let it sit, and it rose because you didn't use any starter in it. You just let it sit. How do you know that if you use some sort of starter, that's also considered some other agent, some yeast that you put in there, that's also considered chametz? Any leaven, that means it doesn't matter what you used. Okay, so the kol machmetzes doesn't tell me a different time, it tells me a different type. What about lo yeyachel? It shall not be eaten. That I need for something else. Look at the Tanya. It was taught in the Brisa. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, don't confuse this with as if this is support for Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which maybe yes, but that's not what we're doing here. Reb Shimon is accepting Rabbi Yossi Aglili in this area, that the pasuk of Lo Yeyachal is teaching me Minayin LePesach Mitzrayim Shem Chimutzi Noyeg Ela Yom Echad Talmud Laim Lo Yeyachal Chametz V'Samach LeHayem Etzem Yotzim. He learns it. How do I know that on the first Pesach, when they were still in Egypt, they only had a prohibition of eating chametz 1 day? After that, once they started to leave, once the rest of those 7 days until they got to the sea, they were allowed to eat chametz. It was only the first day that they weren't allowed to eat chametz. That's because it says, Lo yeyachal chametz, hayom etem yotzim. Today you're leaving. That the juxtaposition of don't eat chametz today, you are leaving. That today tells me that I only don't eat chametz on that day. Aha. So what we just did was Reb Shimon only has 1 pasuk, because the other 2 psukim he's using for 2 other limudim. One is telling me any sort of chametz, another one is telling me about historically I only had 1 day of Isser chametz on the original Pesach. So he only has 1 time when chametz is also, which is on Pesach itself. Rabbi Yehuda machmas davarachim minalei. Rabbi Yehuda that says all 3 psukim are extra. They're all telling me different times of chametz. Where does he know that chametz, however it's made, is considered chametz? Midaf gerachmana b'lashon machmetzas. Because there is the word machmetzas is a different word. So even though that pasuk is telling me a different time, but the fact that it changes the word, anything that causes leavening, so that includes anything that causes leavening. Even though the pasuk itself, I need to tell me on Pesach that it's asur, but the change of the word, instead of chametz, instead of kol chametz leiseichelo, it says kol machmetzes leiseichelo. That tells me that it includes any way that it gets leavened. We used to, my wife makes her own flour and sourdough, but we used to also make grape juice. So the kids would make grape juice. They would juice her with just grapes, Erev Shabbos. It was delicious. But then the peels of the grapes, what's left over in the juicer, she found that she could put it into the sourdough starter, and it would rise. It would cause the yeast on the peels, but cause it. So you could use other items, not just traditional yeast or whatever. You could use other things that would cause it to rise. The Gemara here is saying kol machmetzes. It doesn't matter what starter you use. You could use. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, I learned this actually. I learned this because many years ago I went to a bakery. So someone was mashgiach in a bakery, and it was a sourdough, healthy bread. Anyway, I said, "What do you use for the starter?" So this was in Australia. So they use sultanas, that's what they call raisins, and yeast. And they have 2 buckets, and a starter, which is just bread and water, flour and water. And then they would mix them together, and that was a starter. And this whole shaila, it's mamish yayin nesach or stam yainam. The raisin wine has a prohibition of stam yainam. So that was a shaila. Okay. Now it says the Rabbi Yossi Aglili Minali. What about Rabbi Yehuda uses machmetzes just like Reb Shimon, that is coming to tell me any sort of starter would create chametz. He doesn't use the whole pasuk; he just uses the change in the word. But what does Rabbi Yehuda? Where does he know that Pesach Mitzrayim was only one day? That the Isser Chametz and that original Pesach was only one day. The Rabbi Yossi Aglili Minali. Where does Rabbi Yehuda know that from? He doesn't need an extra pasuk. He just has a smichas. The juxtaposition of hayayim next to leiseichel of chametz, hayayim, that hayayim tells it to me. It's not, the pasuk is an extra, it's a smichas. It's the juxtaposition. Iba Yasema, another pshat is smuchan leidarish. We have the Gemara, different places, that says that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smucham unless it's in Sefer Devarim. He doesn't say that anything that's juxtaposed is going to be alima. Only in the book of Devarim he holds that. So it could be that Itaka holds that Pesach Mitzrayim, they weren't allowed to eat chametz for 7 days. How do you know he holds that? How do you know? It's fine. Okay, he disagrees. When they came out of Egypt, they had matzah for 7 days, not just for 1 day. Amar Mar. We're going to go back to discuss something that we mentioned before in the Brisa. How do you know that someone that eats chametz on Erev Pesach, he violates a negative prohibition? Don't eat chametz on it, referring to the Karban Pesach. That's what the Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It says that matzah is 7 days, which means that chametz is only 7 days, and you're adding an extra 6 hours. Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara now goes back to discuss. Reb Shimon had a good point. Shaper Kamle Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon tells Rabbi Yehuda a good point. What is Rabbi Yehuda's response to Reb Shimon? Rabbi Yehuda Malach Ahula Kavechayva Apilu Bisman Azeh Dasa. Rabbi Yehuda says that pasuk of 7 days, you should eat matzah. And it tells me also that you shouldn't eat chametz. It's coming to compare the mitzvah of matzah to the prohibition of chametz. Because I could have thought like this. It says, Al matzah simreim yechlu, that I eat matzah together with the Karban Pesach. Could have thought that if I don't have a Karban Pesach, I don't have to eat matzah or maror. Now I would know that I don't eat chametz. It says 7 days you don't eat. It says you don't eat chametz. But I wouldn't know that I need to eat matzah. So the fact that it puts together, don't eat chametz, 7 days you should eat matzah, is coming to tell me that even if I don't have a Karban Pesach, I still have to eat matzah.
There's a pasuk that says for 7 days to eat matzah.
No, actually, it says 6 days you should eat matzah, 7 days you should eat matzah. It says, I have those 2 psukim. The Gemara learns that kol davar shahaya b'chlal. Yeah, because I have a contradiction in psukim. One pasuk says 6 days you should eat matzah. One pasuk says 7 days you should eat matzah. Comes to teach me that the 7th day is only rishus.
But is the pasuk that you should eat matzah or that you should not eat chametz?
So I have a pasuk that says
we don't have a halacha to eat matzah after the first day.
Yeah, the pasuk actually says that 7 days you eat matzah, and the pasuk says 6 days you eat matzah. But the Gemara learns that just like the seventh day is rishus, the first 6 days is also rishus, and you really have no obligation. Because kol davar shaya b'chlal v'yasam and aklal alamed alatzmei atzah. No, is it? No. Shnei kesuvim. One of the limudim tells me that not only is the 7th day a rishus, it comes to tell me that all 6 days are also rishus. El ala klal kula yatsa. That's the rule. Anything that was part of the rule, the 7th day, but it leaves the rule, it's coming to teach me about all 6 days, that all of them are really rishus. But I wouldn't really know that I need to eat matzah on the night of Pesach, I would think. I don't have the carbon Pesach. I don't have to eat it. It says be'erev teichel matzahs, but maybe that's only when there's a carbon Pesach. So the connection to chametz tells me that I have to eat matzah as well, even bisman hazeh.
Interesting. Thank you.
So where did we get that from? That's the response to Rabbi Yehuda's response to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says, I have a pasuk that says 7 days you eat matzah that's connected to don't eat chametz. So that tells me that the whole prohibition of chametz is only for the 7 days that you have that mitzvah. Reb Shimon well, let's go the other way. Where does Reb Shimon know that this manazeh you have to eat matzah? He used that pasuk to tell me that there's no prohibition of chametz until the time of matzah. Nafkalemi be'erev teichel. Oh, the famous pasuk. It says that evening you should eat matzah. Rabbi Yehuda. Why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda use that pasuk? Let's say someone is tamei. He's going to do a Pesach Sheni. This is a very interesting question. So Pesach Rishon, should he go out and buy matzah? Should he have matzah on Pesach Rishon? It says yes. Be'erev teichel matzahs. He has a mitzvah for that. Sal kedai t'chamina hayel b'Pesach layochal matzah mar nami laynechal kamash malon. So I could have thought that maybe since he doesn't eat the carbon Pesach, he also doesn't have matzah. Kamash malon be'erev teichel matzahs, that a tamei and b'derech recheka has to have matzah as well. Reb Shimon, tamei b'shayah b'derech recheka layitzrich kra. He says that I don't need a special pasuk for someone that's tamei or someone that's not near the Pesach Mikdash, that's not going to bring the carbon Pesach. I don't need that because he's similar to the Laigarami Arla ben Necha, the Tzivachal Layachal Bay, Bayueno Echal Abaloichal Bematzumar. Okay, there's two possibilities of someone that doesn't bring a carbon Pesach. One is an Arel, someone that didn't have a circumcision. Why didn't he have a circumcision? Not because he's not religious. He didn't have a circumcision because of hemophilia. His 2 brothers passed away from bleeding from the circumcision. So the rule is you don't give him a circumcision either. So, but if he doesn't have a circumcision, then he's restricted and he can't eat from the carbon Pesach, even though he's not committing any prohibition there. But nevertheless, he doesn't eat from the carbon Pesach. But I have a rule. Yeah, I believe so. So I have a rule that even though he doesn't eat from the carbon Pesach, it says kol aral layochal boy, he doesn't eat from the carbon Pesach. Boyueno eichel, the carbon Pesach he doesn't eat. Aval oichel b'matzah mar, but he eats matzah and mar that evening. So if an aral, someone that's uncircumcised, eats matzah and marar, so probably someone that's tamei or b'derech rechaika, that's also not bringing the carbon Pesach, also doesn't eat. Also who doesn't eat the carbon Pesach also does eat matzah and marar. So Reb Shimon says I don't need 2 psukim for that. I only the boy tells me that an aral eats matzah and marar, so therefore tamei b'derech rechaika also does. So therefore he doesn't need the pasuk of ba'erev, and he doesn't need the pasuk of ba'erev to teach me that tamei b'derech rechaika has matzah on that evening. And he uses ba'erev to tell me ba'erev teichel matzahs, that even b'zman hazeh, when there's no carbon Pesach, you still have a mitzvah to eat matzah. Now the Ben Nechar Rashi tells us is someone shenisnakru ma'asav lav shebashamayim lo yilchol haTorah. Somehow he's someone that's not religious, someone that maybe it needs a mumar. A mumar doesn't bring a carbon pesach. Probably that's the pshat. It's coming to tell us that although he doesn't bring a carbon pesach, but he's still obligated to eat matzahs. He says, of course he's obligated to eat matzahs. He's chayiv on the whole Torah. Maybe it's coming to tell me that he's allowed to eat matzahs, even though he's not allowed to eat pesach. So that's also obvious. Is matzah holy? That there should be some restriction on matzah. You know, put a restriction on Streit's matzah. This says we're talking about Korban Pesach was shechted when he was a mumar. Now he does tshuva. He still can't eat from the Korban Pesach. But nevertheless, he's obligated to eat the matzah and maror. So this says the chiddush. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ksiv b'hai, Ksiv b'hai. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's written that you need to eat matzah both by the ben nechar, by the aral and the ben nechar, by the uncircumcised, and also by someone that's tummy. It says by both. Okay. Back to our original question. We're able to hold concentration all the way till here. The Gemara says, Mani Masnisim. Who's the author of our Mishnah? Do you remember our Mishnah said, comments of a guy that's over of a Pesach, you're allowed to have a na, but if it belongs to a Jew, you're not allowed to have a na. Who's the author of our Mishnah? The bottom line of Chavtes, Hamad Beis. Rabbi Yehuda, chametz tamakam rafil denachri. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, then even a non-Jew's chametz. He doesn't say, Rabbi Yehuda didn't tell me chametz shavar of a Pesach is only of a Jew. The Reb Shimon, if you say it's Reb Shimon, Yisrael nami mishak kashari. According to Reb Shimon, there's no halacha of chametz shavar of a Pesach. Once Pesach is over, you're allowed to eat your chametz. Reb Yaisi Aglili, and if it's Reb Yaisi Aglili, I feel teichmani nami mishak kashari bana. It can't be Reb Yaisi Aglili, because he holds even on Pesach you're allowed to have benefits from chametz. You're just not allowed to eat it. So he doesn't fit at all. Reb Yehuda, we have an issue with the non-Jews chametz. With the Reb Shimon, we have an issue with the Yid's chametz, that it should be mutter. We're going to have two answers here. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Lo'ilam Reb Yehuda. Really, it's following Reb Yehuda. We had an issue with the non-Jews chametz being aser. The Yalef Sarda Achila Misar Duriya. Reb Yehuda actually holds that it's only a Jew's chametz that's aser after Pesach. Where does he get that from? Says he learns Sarda Achila from Sarduria Masar Duriya Shel Chay Terei Aval Terei Shel Achem Shel Gevaya Af Sarda Achila Shel Chay Terei Aval Ata Eichel Shel Achem Shel Gevaya. Says like this. Rabbi Yehuda holds that just like when it comes to Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh, you're only prohibited if it's your own chametz, but if it belongs to someone else, meaning a non-Jew, or if it belongs to Hekdesh, you're allowed to have it in your property. Right? We learned that before, at the beginning of the Masechta, that someone else's chametz, as long as you're not responsible for it, was allowed to be in your property. So too, when it comes to eating chametz, the only chametz that this is very strange, the only chametz that you're not allowed to eat is your own chametz. But you're allowed to eat chametz of a non-Jew, and you're allowed to eat chametz of Hekdesh, even on Pesach. Just like you're allowed to own it and not own it. Just like you're allowed to have it in your property. Obviously, if you own it, then it's yours. But if it belongs to someone else, then you're allowed to have it in your property. So too, you're allowed to eat it. Tosfos says over here, how are you eating something that's not yours? It's impossible. If the guy gave it to you to eat, then it's yours. If you're stealing it, then you're responsible to pay for it. And we said that anything that you're responsible for is prohibited. The only way that it was permissible is if you had no responsibility for it. Now you're eating it, you become responsible, even if you're stealing it. Even if you say that it's not yours while you're eating it, you weren't kindness or something, but you're still responsible to pay for it, it's going to be a prohibited. So, Nira L'Riva, Tosfos says, it doesn't mean that it's permissible to eat on Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it's not yours. It means it's permissible to have benefit from, even though it's not yours. Okay. Ubedinhu, according to this, we have a huge problem, because Rabbi Yehuda is now telling us that if it's not yours, then you're allowed to have benefit from it, which is if it belonged to a non-Jew, you're allowed to have benefit from, or if it belonged to Hekdesh, you're allowed to benefit from. So if you go back to the Mishnah, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is trying to explain the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Chametz of a Nachrid, Shavar of a Pesach is mutter ba'ana. Question number one is, Chametz of a Nachri, Shavar of a Pesach is mutter ba'ana. Chametz of a Nachri, even on Pesach is mutter ba'ana. It's a kasha on our Mishnah, right? If you say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, it's why does it have to say a chametz of a guy that Pesach passed that you're allowed to have benefit, even on Pesach you're allowed to. And I don't know how Tosfos is going to explain this. Also, the Gemara is going to ask one more question. Why do you say mutter ba'ana? According to him, it's even mutter ba'achila. You're allowed to eat it. Let's see. The Gemara says like this. So, really, you should be allowed to eat it. The Mishnah should say you're allowed to eat it as well. Why doesn't it say that? Because it wanted to say that if it belonged to a Jew, you're not allowed to have benefit from. So to make it symmetrical, in the Mishnah, we're talking about what's prohibited for a Jew. We said what's prohibited for the non-Jew. What's prohibited for the Jew is even if it's even that it's even asur bahana. So for the non-Jew, it's mutter bahana, but it could have said also mutter ba'achila. Really, it could have said that even on Pesach it's mutter bahana. I did the Tana di Yisrael lachas tananami denachri lachas mani. But once we're saying that the Jews' chametz is asur bahana after Pesach, so we said the guy's chametz is mutter bahana after Pesach, even though really we could have said on Pesach itself. We just try to keep it symmetrical. That was the answer of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. So this whole Gemara here was all a question. Who's the author of our Mishnah? Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. We didn't know that he held that non-Jews chametz should be permissible. He says, yeah, he does hold that. Rava says a different answer. Who's the author of our Mishnah? Loilam Reb Shimoni. Really, it's Reb Shimon. But Reb Shimon said that after Pesach, it's mutter ba'ana. How does he say if it belongs to a Jew, it's asur ba'ana? Reb Shimon knasa kanes. Reb Shimon says that there's a knas. You're right, biblically it's mutter ba'ana, but there's a fine. Because this Jew was holding on to chametz over Pesach. He was violated bal yira bal yimatze. We say you can't eat it after Pesach. The Gemara says we understand Rava the way Rava learns that it's Reb Shimon and there's a fine. Now we understand the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah says shenemar la yira l'chasa'ar. Reb Shimon says really it's mutter ba'ana, but there's a fine because it says you shouldn't own it. That's why after Pesach, because of that prohibition that you owned it over Pesach, so therefore we put a fine on you after Pesach. According to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Rabbi Yehuda said that there's 3 psukim. One tells me Erev Pesach, one tells me on Pesach, one tells me after Pesach, that chametz is asur ba'ana. Which pasuk was the after Pesach one? We said before it was lo yeyachal chametz. Chametz should not be eaten, even after Pesach. Why does the Mishnah conclude mishum shenemar la yira l'chasa'ar? According to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, he says the author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. I should have said lo yeyachal chametz. It's not a fine; it's the biblical prohibition. Misavris, the Gemara answers aseifakai. Do you think that shenemar la yira l'chasa'ar is referring to the last part of the Mishnah that after Pesach a Jew's chametz is asur? Areishakai is talking about the first part of the Mishnah. V'achi kamar. This is what it means. Chametz shel nachri shaval of a Pesach muter bahana. You're allowed to have benefit from a non-Jew's chametz after Pesach. Shenemar la yira l'cha shalcha yetaraya. You're allowed to see other people's chametz. If that's the case, the yalav sar da'achila misar dariya, and then we learn the prohibition of ownership. From that prohibition to the prohibition of eating, we said that just like someone else's chametz I'm allowed to have in my possession, I'm also allowed to eat someone else's chametz. Now the Gemara says, Vazdil Tamaya. Rava and Rav Acha bar Yaakov, they follow their own logic. We see this machlekes somewhere else. The Itmar, because it was stated like this. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if someone eats a non-Jew's chametz, Rava Amar Leika, after Pesach, Rava says there's malchus there. There's a negative prohibition, which is exactly what Rava said in our Mishnah, that our Mishnah is not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah is the opinion of Reb Shimon, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's usher even after Pesach if it belongs to a guy. So that's what Rava says over here, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there'll be malchus after Pesach. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amayna Leika. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says there's no malchus according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it didn't belong to a Jew over Pesach. Rava Malaika Layalef. Rabbi Yehuda Sar Da'achila Misar Dariya. Rava says that there's malchus because he doesn't have that limud that if you're allowed to have it in your possession, if it doesn't belong to you, you're also allowed to eat it. He doesn't have that. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds that even a non-Jew's chametz is asur midei rice after Pesach. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amayna Leika Yalef Sar Da'achila Misar Dariya. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says that a non-Jew's chametz after Pesach is mutter. He learns just like you're allowed to have it in your possession, you're allowed to have enjoyment after Pesach. Now the Gemara says, "V'hadabe Rav Acha bar Yaakov mahi." However, Rav Acha bar Yaakov retracted. Let's go a little bit further. We'll try to turn the page to the next 2 dots. Otherwise, we'll have to go over this tomorrow, right in the midst of the tangle. The Tanya, Rav Acha bar Yaakov switches his opinion, and he says that it's really asur, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it belonged to a non-Jew. As we have a brisa, it says, if someone eats chametz that belong to hekdesh on Pesach, mal means he violated meila. Meila is anyone that has personal benefit from something that belongs to hekdesh. He ate chametz, he got filled from hekdesh, from chametz, and it's on Pesach. He violates meila. Some say that he didn't do meila. Now, usually the Yeshayimrim is Reb Nassan. Over here, the Gemara says, "Man Yeshayimrim." Who is the Yeshayimrim? Amar Rab Yechanan Rab Nechuni ben Akani. Rab Nechuni ben Akani. The Tanya was said in the Brisa. Rab Nechuni ben Akani Ya'ises Yom Kippurim Keshabbos Tashlumin. Rab Nechuni ben Akana says that Yom Kippur is just like Shabbos when it comes to payment. We have a rule of kamlei b'derabim. If someone commits a crime that incurs 2 punishments, a lesser punishment and a more severe punishment, he only gets the more severe punishment. We don't give him the lesser punishment. So let's say someone lights someone else's haystack or granary on fire on Shabbos. So he has to pay for it, but he also gets the death penalty because he violated Shabbos. Or kares, if it was b'shegeg, not b'shegeg, kares would be b'mezid, but without witnesses. So the rule is that he doesn't have to make the payment because he has the more severe punishment. He has the more severe punishment of kares. Now, Reb Nechuni ben Akana says Yom Kippur is the same like Shabbos, that just like on Shabbos you don't have to make the payments because of the more severe punishment. The same thing is with Yom Kippur. Mas Shabbos mischayev b'nafshe yipatim min tashlumin. Ach Yom Kippur mischayev b'nafshe yipatim min tashlumin. Now, what comes out from this is like this: if you don't have to make payments because of the severity, so it would come out that if someone eats chametz of hekdesh on Pesach, he doesn't have to make the payments to hekdesh. We were talking about lighting a fire, someone else's fire, you have to pay the damages. Now we're going back to Me'ila. If someone eats chametz, which is an Isser Karas, and normally, if it belonged to hekdesh, you would have to make payments because you violated Me'ila, you have to pay. But here he doesn't have to. Why? Because of its prohibition of chametz and its karas, so he doesn't have to make the payment. So the rule is, if you don't have to make the payment to hekdesh, so therefore there's also no me'ila. So we go back to, there's a machlekes, if someone eats chametz of hekdesh on Yom Kippur, there's two opinions. One say mal, one say loy mal. Where did he get the loy mal from? It belongs to hekdesh. The answer is there's no me'ila because it was prohibited on Pesach, and it's the Isser Karas. So one opinion holds that chametz that belongs to hekdesh is the Isser chametz. That can't be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, right? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, at least according to Rabbi Bar Yaakov, Rabbi Yehuda said that chametz that belongs to someone else doesn't have a prohibition. If it belongs to someone else or hekdesh, it doesn't have the prohibition. So the Yesh Aimrim that says loimal, why was there no me'ila? Because there was a prohibition of chametz. The one that says ma'al says that there's no prohibition of chametz. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Rabbi Yosef says, the machlekes over here is if there was value to this chametz. In other words, I'm not allowed to eat it. I'm not allowed to eat this chametz, but I can feed it to my dog. The problem is if I have something of hekdesh, do I consider that value? Can I really take hekdesh, be paid it, it's chametz, and be paid that hekdesh, the chametz, and now feed it to my dog? In other words, did I violate me'ila here? Was there any value to this chametz? Because it's asur ba'ana. Mandam or mal, the one that says that you violated me'ila, that was the first opinion. Says that you could have redeemed this chametz. You ate it, but you could have redeemed it and given it to the dogs, and so therefore there is value to this chametz. And the one that says that loimal, he holds that you don't redeem chametz to feed it to dogs. Therefore, this chametz doesn't have any value, and therefore there was no me'ila. That's the first approach to this. Rav Acha bar Rava Tanalei Lahash Maitem Shmeider Rabbi Yosef. Rav Acha bar Rava explains this statement from Rabbi Yosef Bahalish in a little bit different. We didn't get to our point yet. The point is going to be Rav Acha bar Yaakov. It says like this: the Kuli Alma in Paidnas Akachim Lachin Leklavim. Everyone holds that right now there's no value to this kachim because I can't redeem it to feed it to the dog. So in other words, what you ate on Pesach didn't have, right now it didn't have value. However, it has value later. And the machlekes says, B'davar agarim lamam and kamam and dami. Because mandamar mal kasavar davar agarim lamam and kamam and dami. Mandamar leimal kasavar davar agarim lamam and lav kamam and dami. Now, this would cause if after Pesach you would be allowed to have benefit from this. We're following the opinion of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds that after Pesach, chametz is really mutter. It's only usher as a knas because you violated bal yirah bal yimatzeh. But if you didn't violate it, it wasn't yours, it was hekdesh or whatever, then after Pesach you should be allowed to have benefit from it. So what you did now was you destroyed something that would have had a value later. So you were goyrem, you caused a loss of money to hekdesh after Pesach. Is that causing a loss for later on? Is that considered me'ila? So that's the machlekes, according to Rav Acha bar Rava. Now here goes the point. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says the kuli alma davar garim lamam and kamam and dami. Everyone holds that causing a loss to hekdesh after Pesach would have been a loss. And here the machlekes between the one that says mal and the Yeshayimrim that say loy mal is really a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Mandam loy mal, the one that says that you didn't violate meila, Rabbi Yehuda. He holds that chametz after Pesach is asur bana, even if it wasn't yours, even if it was hektish. Unbelievable. That means Rav Acha bar Yaakov doesn't hold of his own opinion, because according to him, according to the way Rav Acha bar Yaakov was learning, Rabbi Yehuda held that only if it's your own is it asur, but if it belonged to hektish, it was mutter. Here we have a proof that Rav Acha bar Yaakov switched his mind, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that even hektish or a non-Jews chametz is really asur, even after Pesach, even on Pesach, and even after Pesach. Mandam Mal, one that says that there was a prohibition of Mila, is Reb Shimon. He holds like Reb Shimon, that says that after Pesach it has value, and Davar Agarim Lamamin is Kamam and Dami. But Rav Acha bar Yaakov Udamar the Rabbi Yehuda Yalav Sar Dachil Misar Deriya. But Rav Acha bar Yaakov said that Rabbi Yehuda says that it's permissible after Pesach. It's even permissible on Pesach if it didn't belong to you. Elohada be Rav Acha bar Yaakov Mehi. Rav Acha bar Yaakov changed his mind. Okay, Rav Ashi Amar Dekuli Alma Im Paidim. Rav Ashi says he has a different approach to this. He says really everyone holds that right now there's no value to this chametz. V'davar garim l'mamen lav kamam dami, and there's no value to the chametz later either. V'acha b'plikta the Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'Rabbanan kamiflagi. And the whole machlekes over here is, do we follow Rabbi Yossi Aglili or do we follow the Rabbanan? Rabbi Yossi Aglili held that chametz was never asur bana. Mandam or mal ka Rabbi Yossi Aglili. One that says mal holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili that chametz is mutter bana, and therefore you had benefit from hektish, which has actual value. Mandar malay mal ka Rabbanan, the one that says that you didn't have benefit from something that has value, holds like the Rabbanan that hektish that chametz is asur bana.